Hello and welcome to another Stompy 51 miniature adventure, which today is going to unbox 16 beautiful Kev Adams Goblin Archer sculpts by Old School Miniatures, and we'll compare them against the many other goblins I have by Kev Adams in my collection in a bit of a slow burn project amongst many on the side. And because, as you may know from watching the channel, I have a bit of a penchant for Chariots, and it will involve some of those too. Because I got an email from Old School Miniatures the other day asking for feedback, and I thought, hey, I can do better than filling out a form. So, Old School Miniatures. I do remember going to some business studies class once, so they said, if you're going to name a business, you should name it what you do. And I must say, it doesn't get more clear than Old School Miniatures. Right. So we've got a nice little box here from them. Kickstarter delivered very expeditiously, which is more than can be said for many a Kickstarter. I've been so busy, I haven't actually had a chance to get through it. So let's open it up without too much annoying crackling for you and see what we've got. So there should be 16 Goblin Archers, including Command. And so that's the Command. That's the big boss. With his bow and arrow on his back. Very well armoured. And you know what, actually? As we go along, let's get out a Impact Miniatures kind of rustic revival of some Heartbreaker miniatures. Goblins, that's the one. This is a Nightmare Miniatures Goblin, because if you watch this channel, you've seen me moan enough that all this amazing Kev Adams goodness is made in the European Union, which has implications for us in the United Kingdom after the ingenious decision to separate ourselves from the nearest largest trading bloc. So there's that one. And then we've got an actual, I'm sure this must be Kev Adams, little gobbo from, I don't know, the early 90s. So right, let's, now obviously not all of these goblins are always the same, but yeah, so he's definitely got a bit bigger of late, and this is very much compatible with his style for Nightmare Miniatures. Definitely bigger than the Heartbreaker Miniatures days, and way bigger than the original Games Workshop days. Right, I mean, look, that guy with his beautiful standard screaming out character and violence, mischievous violence. Yeah, he is a lot bigger. But the thing about goblins is that it's more obviously acceptable to have lots of different sized little monsters and creatures. No one would look twice, if this was some kind of 1980s puppeteer's dream, like, what was it called? Labyrinth. Whereas, yes, people always say, oh, there's all these different sized humans, and so don't worry about scale. And that's true, but I'm sure it looks a lot weirder if you've got humans sculpted in all manner of different ways. And this is all sculpted by the same dude, but different sizes. And so it looks perfectly plausible to me. And that guy's got an entire human or elf torso on his standard. And I must say, these are all very well sculpted and very well cast, so a little bit of light filing would easily resolve the flash over there. And he's got a peg leg, because, they've got great medical care in the Goblin Horde. And then look at that, Old School Miniatures 2023. And, again, much bigger than the original GW. Where, there's another GW little fella. Yeah, he's also a lot smaller. They almost look like snotlings. And there's another, that's not old school miniatures, that's Nightmare miniatures. So they're a lot bigger, some of them. Right, what have we got here? Another bag of archers. It's like little gems taking them out. And it's a Thracian cap. Not really au fait with all the historical inspirations for the various gobos, but he's clearly loosing his arrow. And look at the variation, you know, they've even all got different little pouches for their arrows, quivers, whatever they call them. I'm always surprised by how freely available decent armour is to these goblins, given that whenever you read a little bit about history, you know, it was only the medieval elites who had access to all of this, but these little scummy goblins, they seem to have full access. Maybe they've just been pillaging and looting as they go. We've seen 8 so far, and what have we got over here? We've got 4 more, and he's been very good at creating variety. And where was the other one who was loosing an arrow, so we can just see if he used the same dolly? A perfectly acceptable approach, frankly. Yup. So that's clearly the same dolly, same shoes, same legs, same torso, same bow, but sufficiently different not to be overly fussed about it. It's not a Phrygian cap, is it? I don't know. It looks kind of, well, more Night Goblin-y. And very Attila the Hun. You know, he's almost got like a kind of distorted skull. And a little ponytail. Ooh, that looks a bit fiddly to remove. I'll have to be careful with that one. But all good. We come to the last pack. A lot of character. Oi! You's all gonna die for the Gobbo Horde. Yeah. Again, I have to be careful with that little ball of moulding flash, whatever it's called. They are beautifully moulded. Pretty high quality. Is that a K? Or for Kickstarter? Oh, because he's nicked someone's mug. Possibly a dwarven mug. As part of the underworld skirmishing in the goblin caves, meeting up at some point, presumably with a dwarven hold. So that's the pile of gobbos. And as we're at it, I thought to myself, this is a kind of slow burn project, which I've got sitting in the garage, and now would be an apposite moment to pull it out. I suppose we can do a bit of size comparison as we go. So, basing is always the bane of my hobbying life. So, when Age of Sigmar came out, I based a load of my goblin chariots for that, and then realised that actually, I think I've lost track now. I can't remember if they've made a new model or if they've just scrapped this model. But basically, you can't really play these in Age of Sigmar, you know, in terms of having a playable army, because to have a playable army, I've realised you've got to have, you know, one of the newer actual factions. You can't play with one of the legacy factions. And I know people will say, oh, you can play with whatever you want. I mean, you can, but if you want to have an even-sided game, you need to kind of keep up with the flow and at least go with it. So, anyway, so what I realised was I needed to break these off and put them onto square bases, because I think they will have a future life in Kings of War. And if not in Kings of War, and I've square based them, then I can use them basically for anything. the various miniature agnostic games, which anyone watching this will know and love, Saga Age of Magic and, of course, Dragon Rampant. So anyway, so first of all, this box is where I just dump all my old school goblins. Oops. And I've done a video of this before, so I won't do it again. But basically, these are the Heartbreaker miniatures made in spin cast resin, and gorgeous though they are, just get in focus here. Gorgeous though they are, these are the ones which are least kind of breakable. They do tend to snap, but that's probably because I'm not very careful with them. So he's a bit smaller, that fella, but largely they're quite chunky, albeit perfectly in keeping with the Nightmare miniatures and now old school miniatures Kev Adams gobbos, for obvious reasons. I mean, if these guys are in the same unit, would you even look twice? And that may well be what happens. But the thing is, I think if I were going to rebase these, I would have to be super careful, because I do remember if you kind of touched anything, like a little leg would break off. So I would probably have to break the bases, because I suppose the question now is, how do I base these old school miniatures? And I think I probably square base them on 20mm squares, because then I can, again, use them for Kings of War and other things. And there was probably a mistake to round base these. And then, of course, you can get plenty of old school Kev Adams gobbos on the Black Tree Designs website, because they've got the former Harlequin miniatures range. I'm pretty sure these were once Harlequin miniatures. They are slightly on the smaller side, but as discussed, so what? These seem to be some Heartbreaker miniatures, actual metals, which I think I've swapped for over the years. I'm sure they used to sell like a pack of about 10 of these for £1 each, and they were fantastic. And strangely, these seem to be slightly bigger and perfectly in keeping. He's got a bit more into depth of face, hasn't he? I mean, that guy is cute and characterful, but this guy seems to be screaming foul menace. What else is there in here? Right, these are Uskal miniatures, some random French manufacturer where Kev seems to have made some kind of Blood Bowl goblins. And I got a few of these just to be, I think, the extra gobbos for an orc team, but then didn't need them. But they may have a future, given my enormous penchant for Chariots, because, so here's one that I rebased to be square based for aforementioned reasons. But also, I realised that in the world of 3D printing, you don't have to pay 30 quid for a Chariot. You can buy an STL and then get someone to print it for a few quid. And then to make sure that they were in keeping with the rest of my collection, I, which is obviously all these old school wolves, I managed to pick up a few of these and then attach them to the harness. Now, there was a bit of a problem in that if you see the shaft over here, it's very long, and these little wolfy boys have long tails. And I thought, look, there's only a limited number of permutations to resolving this issue. You can either lengthen the shaft in circumstances where every time you try and cut this kind of 3D printed resin, it just sort of snaps unless you pay loads more money and get a different kind of resin. Or I could do some kind of amazing 3D, amazing green stuff sculpting and have some droopy little tails going all the way down here that look like the originals. And I thought that is beyond me. Or you could just shorten the tails, use your limited green stuffing skills, and then hope that when you paint them, no one will be the wiser. I'd be interested in your thoughts about what would you have done. Do you have a cleverer solution to this weighty hashtag first world problem? And this little gobbo, what's he from? Little snotling, I think he's from one of the Gloomspite kits. And I thought, well, you know, he's just turning out to be just a little bit of a snack for a hard-working wolfie. And I thought to myself, would it look so out of place if he was over here and if I could get a whip into his hand and give him some kind of actual use? No one's going to really notice that he's actually for Blood Bowl because he looks pretty medieval. And then I thought to myself, well, who's going to go onto this chariot? So I thought on each one we would have some kind of big bossy looking fellow, someone who's obviously in charge, as I rummage through what we've got here. And so I snipped off the base of this nightmare miniature. So I thought you would have one big fella, one little fella. This is an old school Games Workshop Kev Adams dwarf. And then you would have one dude with a bow. And I think these guys are probably too big to plonk on. Here's one of the non-Kev Adams original gobbos from what must be the mid-1990s Chariot. So there you go. And the nice thing about these 3D printed chariots by Duncan Shadow, I should have said, the nice thing about them is they have what's called, I believe, a lot of real estate on the back compared to your standard Goblin chariot. So you can really pack the little boys in, albeit I think 3 is enough. And I love that phrase, talking about how much real estate there is, because I remember getting together with some guys to get a watch for a family member. And we were trying to work out what to write on the back of the watch. Something nice and kind and recognising all they've done for all of us and how much we love them. And the message kept getting longer and longer. And I said, well, you know, is this all going to fit? And the one guy said, well, it depends on how much real estate you've got at the back of the watch. And I thought, well, isn't that a great phrase? How much real estate do we have on the back of this gobbo chariot? And the answer is quite a lot. So, I mean, this Nightmare Miniatures gobbo seems to be wearing an entire bear on his standard and on his back. No, is that a wolf? That looks like a wolf. He's got a wolf on his head and a bear on his standard. So he's too big to go on this. And also I think his base would be a real pain to clip off. His slaughter base. So he's not going to go on that. See, these three look like, you know, a perfect little band. Then who can we put on the second one? You see, these are the weighty decisions I like to get involved in. Oops. Oh, yes. And as we're at it, I mean, there's a little guy just drinking some beer, and I'm sure he is Kev Adams as well. Is he by Casting Room Miniatures? The Wargames Foundry lot? And he was expensive. I bought him in a pack of not very many for quite a lot of money a long time ago as a little Blood Bowl marker. But I don't really play much Blood Bowl, so maybe he could just be having a nice little beer whilst everyone else goes off to war. Why did I decide to green stuff that side and not that side? That is a bit of a downside of these little wolves. And did I say this was sculpted by Duncan Shadow? I think I did. But, you know, if you want fluidity of narration, this is not the channel for you. Right. What we were doing, we were trying to work out who we can put onto this chariot. So, in terms of the big dude at the front, I'm not really sure. I thought I did have one. I mean, we've got an archer. I think he's suitable. we've got the little fellow in question that we need. So you can go over here. Let's get that in focus. And then, who can we use as the main fella? No, so he's clearly a little fella who needs to go on the back of a chariot. I got on some kind of Blood Bowl Kickstarter, and he's wearing some kind of dead rat and is pointing out various Blood Bowl tactics. There he's in focus. And I thought, why can't he be some kind of wizard? So do you know what? Maybe he could be the fella at the front. But it does look a bit strange, doesn't it? We need someone very big, very tall. A gobbler who looks like they're in charge. So I painted this guy for Warhammer 7th edition. And is he in keeping with these? I mean, that's the point. They're goblins. It doesn't have to be perfect. Perfectly in keeping. I suppose if I were brave, I could rip this guy off. Should I do it in front of a live studio audience? So there, everything I said about being fiddly wasn't right. Well, I mean, I would say in trying to cut that slaughter base off, I would have to be very careful. But yeah, he looks entirely in keeping. And he was a bit of an odd one out anyway, because he seems to be a bit high fantasy armoured. You know, where's a goblin like that going to get armour like that? But then again, maybe we shouldn't patronise these little goblins, you know? Just because they've been nefariously described as kind of little cackling maniacs doesn't mean they don't have access to the highest Milanese feel. Right. What else is in here? Let's have a look. There he is. Oops. Flying goblin. I just run carpet, so there's not going to be any terrible breakages. So he could go on the front. Still a bit more scraping there of the base. But he could go on the front because he's huge. And then you can have a little guy. And then actually maybe you could have an archer. Because the good thing about these is you can just snip off the base. Whereas with these, you can't. And I suppose what's good here is that if I've got 16 of these old school miniatures, I must have 4 other goblins to make up a unit of 20. The Kings of War. And he looks like someone you might stick on a chariot. Albeit you don't want to overload the property, so to speak. Because that does look like all the boys have gone to war. Now I have 6 of these, which is quite fantastic. But that's the point about 3D printing. It's not that expensive. But this is not a project for today. Anyway, let's have a look at how everyone would look on this one. And you can see my poor sculpting skills over here, because I wasn't sure what to do with the fact there was a little seat and I didn't have lots of little riders. Well, I used to, but I don't want to have lots of identical little riders on the front. The whole point of this exercise is to have a bit of diversity. So I think here, the way I've been getting around that is, you know, you could have one of the gobbos doing kind of Celtic style, jumping up and down and bravado on the shaft, whilst you have the boss over here. And the advantage of having these little gobbos, original ones, is that you can just shove them on the back. Oh, go on, stay on. Be good little boys. Like having kids. Try and take a photo with them. Sorry, we'll get this in focus. There you go. The little fellas at the back. The boss is on the front. And then actually, do we need to have a third guy necessarily? I mean, it is good to have an archer kind of fella. But maybe that's where we put the little guy. Because we could actually probably fit a third. No, we can't. There's just not enough real estate. But, no, that would have got. He needs to be going forward. But what I must say is you don't want to obscure the detail, because these guys look like little gargoyles from a Disney movie or something. There's a lot of skill and character just in these glorified belt buckles. But if we've descended into discussion of belt buckles, I suspect we should leave it there for today. Please do like, comment and subscribe in the usual way, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.